I might get started. Welcome, I guess, to everybody who's joining us today. My name is Ian Thompson. I'm Head of Consulting with DVE Solutions. And this is our fifth Fireside chat that we've had with various leaders from around the sector who've been sharing their thoughts on a different range of topics. Today, we're here to talk about whether the semester teaching model actually hinders growth and student success. And we've got panelists with us who are at various stages of either introducing or thinking about potential changes, as I think is everybody in the sector. So for those of you who thought you might join and get a right or wrong answer, this is exactly the way to do it. I think you might be disappointed, but I think we'll also have an interesting debate. We have received questions from people who've registered, so we've summarised those questions and we'll go through them today. If by chance you desperately need to ask a question, put it in the chat and we'll see whether we can get to that with the panellists. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Professor Karen Nelson. Karen is the provost at the University of Southern Queensland, has been there for a few years now in a range of roles, always very student focused, as are all three of our panelists today. Joining her, Professor Romy Lawson, who's Deputy Vice Chancellor Students at Flinders University, having joined there, well, probably almost 2 years ago now, or a while ago, and
nearly a year and a half.
Year and a half, probably feels like 3. So, and Romy again has had a great deal of experience and brings a very unique student focus. And one of DVE's old favourites, Professor John Gurmoff, who's Deputy Vice Chancellor of Higher Education at Victoria University. And if you've joined any of our previous sessions, I think last time we had John on, he was at Charles Sturt University and has since moved. So thank you to the three of you for joining, and we really appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts with the higher ed sector and a lot of interested people. I'm going to start today just by throwing to our panelists and give them a chance to have a bit of a say on what they think about this topic, and then we'll get into the questions once they've all had a go. So Karen, if it's okay, I might start with you.
Thanks, Ian, and thanks for inviting all of us to this interesting conversation today. Before I commence, I'd like to acknowledge the Turrbal and Yagara people who are the traditional custodians of the lands that I'm meeting with you all from today. And I'd like to pay my respects to First Nations people and acknowledge the important contribution that they make to our university and the sector more broadly. So, academic calendar. So a few opening remarks. So the academic calendar work that we're engaged in at the University of Southern Queensland is really just one initiative amongst a whole suite of initiatives that we're currently undertaking. And the reason that we're undertaking the calendar work is similar to the reasons that we're undertaking other work, and that is we want to improve student outcomes, which includes improving the accessibility of higher education. And that's particularly important to a university like the University of Southern Queensland, which is regionally based, as you all know. So some of those key parameters that we're addressing through the academic calendar work and through the other projects but that are related to it are about reducing administrative overhead to our students. So making that interaction with the university as seamless as possible and as intuitive as possible from the student's perspective. Fostering and creating a sense of belonging, and that's important at a cohort level as students start to develop their understanding of the discipline, and providing a unique environment in which those students study is one way of helping to foster that. It is also important for us that as we go through this academic calendar work and the other work, that we accompany any work that changes the environment for students with improvements in the way we provide timely access to support for students. So that's another reason for introducing a new academic calendar, but also has work outside the academic calendar domain. And importantly, with this academic calendar work, from our perspective, we're using it as an opportunity and as a vehicle for substantial curriculum reform across all of our coursework and research offerings. So it's a vehicle, and I'll talk more about I guess the process of the project around the academic calendar as we continue our conversation today.
Thanks, Karen. Romy?
Thanks, Ian. And yeah, also I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on Ghana Yata and pay my respects to the traditional owners, past, present, and obviously emerging. And it is always a delight to come and work and learn on this land. So where is Flinders in this conversation? I'd say as a university, we're still exploring and questioning. So, you know, some of these questions that are coming up are very fresh to us. We've been exploring it in such a way that we've actually involved the whole community. So we did a big exercise last year called the Flinders Learning Experience, where we reached out to staff, students, potential students, employees, to really unpack what the expectations of contemporary students for a contemporary higher education experience. And from that, you know, some of this flexibility and how they may want to study has come out, hence the exploring. But we have got some examples of different courses that have already gone into a kind of block mode. I would say on regards to that makes it trickier as far as managing the timetable when you've got a mixed model going on. And so yeah, we're still asking questions. I think though, overall, is there a perfect solution? Is there a perfect study timetable that we should all adopt? And obviously the answer is no. There's no one tool that can do everything that you want to do. And there are some pros for the semester model. You know, you have to consider those as well as the cons. So there's the familiarity. People might choose a university because they know what they're going to get. Staff know what it's like, and there's that familiarity, and sometimes change can be disruptive in a negative way, that people have to take some time to get through change. I quite like disruption myself, but you know, we have to consider that. It also provides time for learning, for that consolidation of learning, where sometimes there's critique that if you do just a shorter block, how is there time to really bring that learning together and consolidate? And you hear that a lot when people are talking about languages, particularly, can you learn something in such a short length of time? And also you could say that the current model is more cost effective because you know where your offerings are, you've not necessarily got multiple offerings going on. However, I think there are a lot of cons or pros for a more block kind of way of thinking. I think it allows for that true scaffolded learning. So rather than doing, you know, concurrent subjects at a time where students are having to juggle what they're learning and how, they're concentrating on something and be able to build from it. It helps allow for multiple start dates at a university, which allows a lot more flexibility, especially when you're looking at international students that might be coming from the Northern Hemisphere. It allows for fast tracking. If a student really wants to do a lot of blocks, then they can actually graduate quicker. But in the same way, it does allow for self-paced progression, whereby a student might think, oh, actually next month I need some time out, you know, I need to breathe, and it can fit into a schedule. So there's lots of different ways that you can think about what works and what doesn't work from our more traditional semester to thinking about different ways. So exploring here at Flinders.
Thank you, Romy. John.
Thanks, Ian. It's great to be with the panel, and I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians on the land on which I'm at, particularly the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay respects to elders past and present and emerging. As one of the universities that's been doing block for a few years now, I think we're into our 6th year, there's been quite a few learnings along the way, but I guess the main point that I would make is that it's not just a scheduling system. It really is about the overarching pedagogy that you have that is really learner-centric and interactive and well supported both inside the classroom and with co-curricular activities outside of the classroom. And that is really the key. There's a huge range of logistical factors you need to take into account. It's certainly a complex system to administer, but if you place the learner at the centre of what you're doing, then it is a highly effective method of learning delivery if you want to improve, particularly the student outcomes among equity cohorts. We've seen improvements in student retention, student progress and success, and overall student satisfaction. So there's measurable improvements that can be made through this mode of delivery. But it is a whole of institution transformation that you end up embarking on, because you're changing culture, custom and practice. You've got to change your policies. You've got to change your systems. You've got to introduce students to a new way of study, but particularly support your staff in converting, effectively semester length units into a much more condensed format. So it's quite a transformational journey that any institution embarks upon when it heads down this track. I might just leave it there.
Thank you, John. As someone who's probably dealt with a bit of that logistical end, my advice is whatever time and money you think it's going to take to do the transition, it'll be a bit more than you think, because it is an institution-wide thing. It's yeah, and positives and negatives, I think, as Romy said, but and certainly disruption, but the outcomes can be very strong. We have received questions from everybody who's registered today, and I've sort of grouped those into some themes, starting, I guess, with reasons to change. So a question for the panel is, where is the best place to start if a university wants to review their teaching calendar? Where do you start? Anybody want, Karen?
I'll go first if you'd like. I mean, I think it's asking the question why. There has to be a reason behind it. For so many, it will drive what you do and what it looks like, but also understanding the why will help take people with you and be able to, share the narrative around it. So understanding the why behind the change, but in order to get that why and to build on that why, I think it's about engaging with the university community to discuss and to review where you are at the moment, where you want to be, and the steps to kind of get there. But I strongly believe that if you can involve people from day one, then you don't have to try and convince them later that they're part of it, they're part of the narrative, and they've contributed to it. So I think that part's really important. But I think as well, we have to be realistic. We have to make sure that whatever we do and we implement, that we're still going to be financially viable. So once you have that why and you've started to unpack what it looks like, then it's about constructing the business case, and it's about that considering the cost of the implication, whether it's time, whether it's resources, etc., and also what perhaps return you might get as a result of that. And that return doesn't necessarily have to be monetary. It can be student satisfaction, it can be progression rates, etc., student experience, as Karen alluded to before and John mentioned. So those are the things that I think about. Know why, involve people, but also know what your business case is around it.
And just following on from that, and I completely agree, it's the why. You've got to start with the rationale, and that rationale has to have meaning to the different stakeholders in the community, so students and staff, and then the university more broadly, as Romy has said. So I just might give an example of how we went about that, because we're a little bit further down the track than you, Romy, but not as far down the track as VU. But so we spent the whole of 2021 asking that question of our staff and students and other stakeholders. And the project team that were involved, gathered nearly 3,000 comments from staff and students over that period. So we were actually able to thematically analyse those comments and work out what was important. for staff and students. So we thought we had a why, but once we got into that process of really analysing the comments and understanding the comments, the why did move. Some of the comments supported what we originally thought was the objective. Some of them refuted some of our assumptions. So that was an incredibly valuable process. But it does also provide that framework for realising the benefits later on. So doing that evaluation, both as you go through, but importantly at the end, and then, you know, in the out years, about whether the initiative that you've undertaken was worth the cost and investment that the university made. And because these are, you know, as John said, they're major transformation projects. They involve a lot of resources, and so that's certainly, I think, the best place to start. And we articulated that at the sort of the midpoint in 2021 with a set of design principles and considerations that we then used to frame the further design work for our flexible academic calendar.
Thanks, Karen. John, your thoughts?
Look, I think we started with what we called our first year college, and I should have stressed at the start, I inherited the block, so I can't take any credit for any of the wonderful improvements, but I can certainly take great pride in being a custodian of the block and seeing how playing a part in its ongoing evolution. But at Victoria University, originally the thought was it would be a year one approach. We formed a first year college where people chose to be primarily teaching focused, and really develop a curriculum across the various courses that we offered that took into account all that we knew about transition pedagogy. Now, there are many authors of such pedagogy, but, you know, Sally Kitt's been one of the key exponents of it, and certainly played a role in our thinking in rolling out what became the Victoria University block model. And it really was about addressing some key issues for us as an institution, where we had to face that if we were to serve our constituents, our student and potential student population effectively, we had to address things like our attrition rate. We had to address student satisfaction. We had to address our completion rates, which were below both the national and the state average. And really over that 5 years, what we've seen is a quite important and significant turnaround where we're now above the averages and among one of the highest, particularly for the equity cohorts that we primarily service, where half of our first year students are first in family, for example. A high proportion of students are first generation migrants from a non-English speaking background. And that really reflects the region in which we're situated very much. But it means that you can't assume a sort of orthodox or traditional mode of university delivery is going to be suitable for those student groups. And we took a punt on block, but it was well researched and well resourced to develop a curriculum and approach to student support that would really give them the best chances of success. And really that was the driving factor. And yes, there have been ancillary benefits along the way for the institution, but fundamentally it was about placing the learner, the student at the center of what we were doing and ensuring that we gave them the best possible chance of not just getting into university, but actually graduating and entering into successful employment.
Thanks, John. And look, I think from our experience as well, the why is critical, but there's often a dominant why and then several other reasons that follow that. That we've certainly, well, I've worked with a previous institution that had a genuine full timetable. So they were, and this was pre-COVID, maybe they've learned something since that, but they were facing, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars of building costs to add more buildings to be able to accommodate growth. And and changing to a different model changed their timetable and allowed them to avoid that expenditure. But it also gave them student benefits, intake benefits for international students, a whole range of things that you've all mentioned. So I don't think it is one size fits all. And I think you've said that it's, it's what is the why for your university? As in John's case, you did it really around retention and progression and student success. And so I think, yes, knowing why you're doing it is the key part of that story.
Mm.
There was a question we were given, and possibly cynically, that it's whether change was coming because of student preference or profitability of the sector and of universities, and what is the actual driver. Romy, you mentioned that business case and the fact that it has to be profitable. Is the profitability alone enough to do it, or?
No, not alone. Certainly not. But you can't separate the two things. If you think about it, universities on average, 60 to 65% of their revenue comes from students. So if you're not providing something that's appealing to students, it's a great experience that they want to come to and stay at, then your revenue is disappearing. So you can't, do something that you think, oh, well, this is going to be super cost effective and that's great, let's do it that way. Because you'll not attract students, and you won't retain students if it's not student centered and giving them that great student experience. Would be what I would say. But you do have to think about these things. I mentioned before that if you were going to have 8 blocks in a year, are you going to repeat modules over and over again? That could become more expensive model for a university rather than the traditional once or twice a year. So that you have to bring those considerations in, because we have to be financially viable and sustainable as a university. But definitely that's not what's first. It's all about the student experience and what we can do. That's what we're here for.
John, did VU have those same feelings? What was the financial, well, don't share details, but is there a financial impact at VU that they could have or did take into account?
Look, the block was certainly introduced in a period where there were financial constraints on the university. And so it was certainly the idea of setting it up took into account that we wanted to set the university up for a sustainable future. And it makes common sense that you want to run a viable, sustainable operation so you can fulfill your charter and serve your community. It's no use running yourself into ongoing deficits and then ending up in a situation that puts your future in doubt. So that was certainly a consideration. But given the extent of the transformation that was required, no university policy, procedure, system or area was left untouched. So remember, because we blocked it all after the first year and we saw some of the preliminary results were very positive and our student feedback was very positive, we decided to block the subsequent undergraduate and postgraduate years. So now that everything we do is block, so in block mode. So we wouldn't have made that decision lightly or purely based on financial reasons. And, it's a consideration, but it's not the overriding reason that you would do something like move to block mode delivery.
Karen?
Well, we also had similar drivers around student outcomes, but one of the other drivers for us as a university was about providing a genuine relief for academic staff to be able to engage in research, so that not only are you improving student outcomes, but hopefully in changing the academic calendar, you provide an environment where research productivity can improve because staff have, a guarantee or quarantine time to conduct that research. And normally in universities, the majority of that time for people who are highly engaged in teaching tends to occur over that, what used to be called semester 3, which tends to span the summer break in Australia. And so people are left with the challenge of having to do their research and have their holidays at the same time. And we wanted to change our calendar, not only to improve student outcomes, and to allow students the flexibility to increase, accelerate, or slow down their study to suit their needs, but to provide that quarantine time for staff that wasn't in conflict with a traditional summer holiday period. So we did have that additional driver, but I might just say a few words, Ian, about our calendar, because it does differ a little bit from VU and perhaps what Romy's thinking about doing, in that we've got a flexible calendar, meaning it's multi-layered. So we've got 12-week trimesters, 6-week blocks, and 4-week intensives, and year-long layers, all in the same calendar. So and Romy mentioned before the challenge of actually having those different layers and different subjects perhaps being offered within one degree, you know, from different layers of the calendar. And that's certainly one of the challenges that's faced us in moving to that model. But what it has done is allow us to really focus on the specific context of each of the programs, and for each program, so each degree, to make a strategic decision informed by their knowledge of the discipline, how students learn in that discipline, the professional accreditation requirements where there are existing requirements, to really design a offering of that program that's the best fit for the cohort and the discipline. And that, I think, has been a bit of a breakthrough for us, not only in terms of garnering support from colleagues who are responsible for delivering those programs, but providing a flexible enough environment within a single calendar. So it's a different sort of flexible academic calendar to a block model. We've definitely got the blocks, and what we've seen so far is that mostly our undergraduate programs are moving into the 12-week trimesters, and that's similar to some other universities that offer that same 3 trimesters of equal length within the one calendar year. Where most of our postgraduate programs moving into the block model, which works incredibly well for busy professionals who are already employed full-time in a professional role. So there's a variety of the way our university is deploying the layers of the calendar.
Karen, can I just ask a sort of follow on from that? Does the student choose, or is it the course that chooses, or the discipline area? Because obviously you can have postgrad and undergrad being different, but can a student be doing multiple models of the multiple teaching times?
They could. So particularly around service taught courses. So for instance, in a science related degree where some of the subjects, if you want to call them those, are offered by because they're core in one program, but they're taken up by other programs in the applied health area or an applied science area, then it is possible for students to be undertaking their study in different length study periods. But what we've been able to do with our design is line up the breaks so that the 12-week trimester has a 2-week break in the middle, which lines up with the beginning and end of the 6-week block. So it's sounds complicated, but when it's laid out for students, it actually looks quite clean.
Yeah. Obviously, if a university makes a change now, potentially there can be a competitive advantage there, and they can increase their market share. And I guess when VU went to the block, it was pretty well much at a point where everybody else was standard semesters. Do you think the aim or one of the outcomes of this is to sort of play market share? But obviously, if every university changes, then what happens with that? Or is it to actually grow the market by having an offering that new students or students may not have considered university, but now will? The example I often think of is the someone wants to do a one subject at a time undergraduate degree, you know, if you're going to do a 3-year bachelor degree, one subject at a time in semesters, it takes you more than a decade to do it. And in fact, sometimes you can't do it because the university says you have to finish in 10 years and you can't. So, but opening it up in sort of any block form or any shorter form does enable that. So do you think this will attract new people, or are we just going to play for market share?
I might start off. Look, I think once students experience the block, they generally love it. You know, you'll have your odd detractor, but the vast majority in our student satisfaction surveys show this, and our qualitative data show that they really do find it a very effective way to learn. The trick, of course, and it does add to the distinctiveness of who you are as an institution, because not everyone is going to do block. Sure, there's some new kids on the block, but I don't see the whole sector going this way. But that said, there is the potential to attract cohorts of students that traditionally didn't see themselves as, you know, taking a university pathway. Now, I've got to say, in our situation, because we're a dual sector, there's an added benefit perhaps in terms of providing a seamless pathway from literally certificate courses through to diploma and into degree and beyond. So it does, I think, aid the ability to draw in different and more diverse cohorts into tertiary study than perhaps was previously possible.
And that's certainly one of the reasons that we've looked at that flexibility. You know, we know that we need each of us as institutions will have just embarked on this project so that it's a good fit with the mission and context of our institutions. And, you know, our mission as a university has, you know, for a long time about delivering quality education in regional areas and by distance. So a flexible approach to the way students can engage with and consume that study is, you know, a really good fit with our mission. So there's you know, there's the alignment there between why you're doing something and the benefits that it will deliver are absolutely critical.
Agreeing with my colleagues, obviously. I think also, you know, when we think about where the point of difference may be, you know, you have to think outside of the university sector. So are we actually behind in some ways? I know VU has led the way for the university sector, but, you know, a lot of learning experiences that you can do, especially online, start any day of the week, any time of the day kind of thing, do it at your own pace. And, you know, I think that there is probably times when people question whether or not the university is the right educational route for them, and whether or not they'll do one of these alternative routes, which might seem a lot more accessible and easy to do, and, you know, that they can have more control and ownership out of. So I think unless the universities keep an eye on what's happening in education in general and try and match, you know, those kind of opportunities, then perhaps we're being a bit Kodak in our approach to things. And, you know, by saying to someone who's interested in having a learning experience, well, sorry, it's the end of March now, you'll have to wait till July, that just doesn't stick anymore. You know, we have to think about that, how we create those opportunities for people to learn when they're ready to learn and not have to have that long wait. So that would just be an extra dimension I'd throw in.
Excellent. There may not be an answer to this, but a lot of people ask, what's the ideal teaching term? And, you know, traditionally we ignore people who accelerate, or the opportunity to accelerate. That a full-time load in a semester is, say, 4 subjects, or I know everyone uses different terminology, 4 subjects at a time. Those who've gone to trimesters might have a 3-3-2 or some version of that. The 6-week block tends to be 2 at a time. The VU block model is 1 subject at a time. Is there an ideal? Does there need to be an ideal? Does it matter?
Well, I guess it comes back to design again, Ian. So, when we spent that, as I said, that whole year asking our students what they needed and what they wanted, and we've developed those design principles to deliver that and have designed the calendar to deliver it. So, they wanted those opportunities to speed up and slow down. They wanted to be able to have a clear break over the summer holiday period, as did our staff, I might add, and fair enough. And they wanted even size teaching periods so that if they were studying in, say, trimester 3, they were getting the same quality of experience as someone in trimester 1 or 2. So I don't think there's an ideal. I think it's really important that, you design that calendar and all the other things that go with it to meet the needs of your particular institution, and deliver benefits, obviously, to students and the institution.
Yep. Other thoughts on that? I'm very conscious of time, and we had a lot of questions, and I might skip ahead. There's some common concerns that come out whenever a change like this gets talked about. A couple of those really relate to placements. So professional placements, I guess particularly around education, allied health, and health in general. Also about assessment, the idea of can you do exams, can you assess between the blocks, whatever they are, and then the workload on sort of academic staff and professional staff. They're probably the three biggest concerns. Anyone want to address how they think they can handle those, or how they are handling those?
I'll jump in about assessment, if that's okay. Sorry, John, did you?
No, you go.
So, I mean, I think, yes, Karen has already talked about this is a vehicle for looking for curriculum enhancement, curriculum transformation, whatever phrase you want to do. And you'd be foolish not to, think about, are we in the best possible shape with how we design our learning experiences? And the big thing that drives learning experiences, we know, is assessment and the feedback that's derived within that learning and the assessment process. So, yeah, we do have to think about how assessment works depending on how you're actually going to have your academic teaching schedule. But I think it can work really well. I think the fact that students, if you are going for a full block mode, are just concentrating on one thing at a time rather than juggling things, and can really scaffold in that way, can be really good towards a student's assessment. The consolidation could be problematic, as I said earlier, trying to make sure that they've got to the point that you'd like to see them at, and they've not perhaps had as much time to sit on it and really take it in. But I think my main comment would be, it's essential that we follow the basic principles of assessment whenever we're designing it, and that is that we make sure that we allow early assessment for our students, and that might be day one if you've only got 4 weeks with people, just so that they can gauge where they are and where they need to go, and that we give not feedback but feed forward, so that when they're doing that early and they're having that formative assessment, then they're going to be able to use it for when it comes to that summative kind of element that really counts. And I think if we stick to those basic principles when we're designing, whatever the length of time it is, whether we have 3 hours with a student or whether we've got 3 years with a student, then we won't go too far wrong. I know that's a very generic answer, but that's where I think we need to come from.
Look, I just add, in terms of the placement issue, I mean, I don't know a university that doesn't struggle with managing placements, and the block doesn't necessarily take that away. You can certainly work around placement issues like you do in a traditional semester system as well. So I don't think it either disadvantages or advantages the institution or the students in that matter. Possibly an area for DVE consultant work, in fact, in terms of how well universities handle their placements.
I can tell you the bit of feedback we have had is in fact positive on this, because in a traditional semester model, when a student's doing a placement, they may well have 2 or 3 other subjects that they're still doing while they're doing this placement. And that just sort of adds to the stress. And I think when they have got a model where they can do 1 or 2 subjects at a time, they can actually focus on the placement and not have to be still studying a subject back at uni. So that if you can make it work, it's the students seem seem much happier with that idea. And whether that's a formal placement like education or nursing, or whether it's just work integrated learning where they say, well, I'm going to take 1 block off of whatever length and I'm going to go and work. And which is hard to do when you're doing 4 subjects, because it potentially delays your degree, whereas it doesn't delay it if you can take a block here and there.
And I think, Ian, you've touched on something that's important in this conversation, in that, there's always been an assumption that, a typical student, takes 4 subjects in the old semester model, 4 subjects in semester 1 and 4 subjects in semester 2, and, dabbles around and then comes back again the following year, and they do that for however many years that their, program requires. But the reality is that most students don't progress in that way. And we know that from the government reported data that focuses on student cohort completion rates, and the fact that I think it's around about 47% of students actually complete a 3-year degree in 4 years. So we know from that sort of data that most students aren't taking what is traditionally thought of as a typical, 4 kind of enrollment. And so some of these approaches around changing the academic calendar to whatever, model you adopt, is about recognizing the reality of contemporary students' lives and designing their experiences to fit in with the notion of a contemporary student, rather than perhaps the way it was, some time ago.
I'm interested, whenever you start a discussion around changing term times, and this seems common at every university, there is immediately a sort of anxiety and resistance to that. The starting point for both students, funny enough, and for staff and both academic staff and professional staff, is a resistance to this. And I wonder why, once they get into it and it happens, a lot of that resistance breaks down. But why do you think there is such a resistance at the beginning? Or have you found it? I might be wrong, but have you found that resistance as well?
I might start, because we're sort of in the middle of the messy bit, as you talk about in project management, where you're sort of underway. So I wouldn't call it resistance so much as concern about are we going to be able to deliver a quality experience for our students? Concerns about my workload's already, really big, and how will I fit something new in that's going to ask me to change all the courses that I'm teaching, or who's going to help me, do this particular piece of work, or, will I have to give up my research in order to get this work done? So it's not so much resistance, I think, as concerns that people have about, in an already resource constrained environment, how am I going to manage to do this piece of work? And, I'm a project manager from way back, and that if you adopt a project management approach to that, activity, what you've got to do is add resources, have champions, be prepared to go at a pace that actually is doable. Make sure that you're wrapping appropriate communications and change management approaches around, doing some myth busting, but genuinely addressing concerns. So I think it's natural when you're talking about such a huge change, that if people weren't going, hey, but, and what if, and, what about this, and how am I going to do that, then you'd be worried. And I think that adds to the rigor of the project if people feel free to come forward with their concerns, and that you commit to addressing them in a genuine and considered way.
There's one thing that I have learned recently that I think is a really powerful thing, just to add on to exactly what you said, Karen. And I think that, you know, change, people kind of think it's that kind of sense of loss, of losing what they're used to, which is one of the things that causes the emotional reaction with people. And I think just acknowledging that people will be feeling, you know, certain ways, and that there is something that they have to give up in order to move to something else, but also celebrating the past. So giving people a chance to kind of say, there was nothing wrong, we've just moved on in time, and let's celebrate all that we've achieved to this moment in time before we move on. I think that helps people kind of get over and move through the change, and that's something that's really resonated with me, you know, just to build on what Karen's talked about in the change process.
John, is it, I mean, you weren't there at the beginning, but is there still some anxiety, or is everybody actually really on board now?
Oh, look, it wouldn't be a university if you didn't have detractors now. And, but look, the vast majority are supportive, and as Karen and Romy both said, you have to acknowledge the past, but you also have to support the transition to the future, and that's the trick. One, you've got to win people's hearts and minds. You've got to show them why it's better. They've got to experience it themselves, and then you've got to support them and give them the time, the resources, and the expertise to be able to make the change. None of which is easy, none of which will be perfect. You know, you learn as you go, and you find where you need to dedicate further resources or do some more thinking through. But as Karen mentioned, if you're open about it, if you're transparent, if you're responsive to the issues that staff and sometimes students raise, and admit that you don't necessarily have all the answers at the very, very beginning, then clearly progress can be made in introducing what is, you know, institution-wide transformative change. I mean, if you can convert an institution to block or part block, I'd say you can manage any change effectively.
I guess an interesting part of that is technology. A lot of people we talk about older non-integrated technology in universities, and a lot of manual processing and a lot of manual systems. And in a model where you did have 4 weeks or 5 weeks between semester 1 and 2, and, you know, 8 weeks or something at Christmas, you could manage that. If you've got 1 week between the end of a teaching block and the start of a next one, you really can't do everything manually. There simply isn't time, and you do need to invest in systems. Has that been an issue, I think, for John, for you, and I guess, Karen, you're in the middle of it, is this older technology, or the fact that everything isn't integrated, a problem?
It can be. You certainly need to revise your business processes. You know, you can't just keep that part of the university the same. It has to change as well. And yes, technology helps as long as you've got the right business processes to start with before you begin your automation and digitization. The trick, I think, is taking some of in our model, we took some of the administrative labor off academic staff. You know, that over time, academic staff were, you know, manually entering results. They were manually doing course outlines and so forth. We were able to, one, automate a lot of that to facilitate that, but also we created other administrative roles that took on the sort of what we call course and unit administration, and left the decision making, the academic decision making, with the academic, but a lot of the administration was taken over by administrative staff, and that certainly helped to improve the workflows and we found a lot of support among our academic staff that we moved in that direction.
Yeah, and we've faced similar sorts of challenges. So that's what I was saying before, is we've got our core academic calendar project, but sitting around it, there are a number of enabling projects. And so we've, like John's mentioned, particularly around our administrative processes, we've not only had large scale business process redesign to make those processes more efficient. But we restructured all of the student-facing staff as well, so that there was consistent business processes across all of the areas that were performing administrative functions. So we implemented a new academic quality framework alongside our academic calendar work. We're implementing a new curriculum management system. We've looked at our assessment policy and practice so that, you know, going back to what Romy was saying earlier, that the assessment becomes the core of the redesign activities. And, you know, and it's brought into question about whether we've gone far enough with our assessment work, and should we be really looking at different ways of assessing a student rather than at a course level, you know. So there's all sorts of exciting, you know, additional enabling projects around it. You know, better improvement around the way we admit and process credit, admit our students and do credit processing, grades finalisation. You know, how long it's possible to allow students to have an extension, and, you know, whether really we can automate those extension processes in ways that really take that administrative burden off staff, as John was saying. So these projects are huge and they're all encompassing. And as John said, they do require considerable change management, and they're not for the faint-hearted. You've got to be committed, and you've got to have your executive colleagues committed to it all the way up, you know, to the head of your Senate or council.
Yeah, and look, that would be our feeling as well, that it's, you know, you have to have everybody on board and everybody supporting it, because there will be ups and downs through the process, and there'll be challenges, and it does cost money, and it's a very hard thing to do on top of your day job when in a resource restricted area. So you've got to have a dedicated team at least leading this. So it's yeah, you've got to have everyone on board, and you don't want to get halfway through and drop it. Really, you can waste a lot of money. Can I just maybe get a wrap up from 1 minute from each of you of would you do it or not do it? And if you had your time again, would you, are we on the right track with sort of doing this or not? So I'm interested in a 1 minute wrap up from each of you. John, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, look, definitely would do it again. The trick is not to think that it's a project that begins and ends, and then you can move on to the next thing. Yes, once you implement block mode delivery and the associated pedagogy and change your business processes and administrative systems, that's the bulk of the change. But like with everything, it evolves, and you're looking for how can you further improve both the in-class and extracurricular class activity, how you can improve the student experience further by taking increasingly greater depth in terms of understanding the student experience with not just the academic side of the operation, but the whole institution, and realizing that there is a journey to be had, and that you know, you can build in a cycle of continuous improvement and evolution of the model as the years go by, and you learn more about what's effective in terms of learning gain, in terms of student satisfaction, in terms of student success. Excellent.
Romy, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we've not gone as far down the journey as the others. So I suppose the thing that I would say is that I think it's important. It is huge. It's not, you know, when you just look at it and it's, you know, should we change our study periods? It's so much bigger than that. It encompasses so many things. So I think it is about making sure that you're in the right state of readiness before you press go and make those final decisions. And some of that does take that longer time to invest in the conversations, the inclusion. And so it's worth spending that time up front until you've got a tipping point of people who are willing and have got that state of readiness before you start trying to do it. Because if you start trying to do a huge piece of work whilst you're still trying to convince people or get people to be active in the process, it's a lot harder. So that kind of preparation to get to the state of readiness, I think, is important. But yeah, it's definitely something that people should be having conversations about and thinking about.
And the question around would you do it again? I think in the same context, definitely. We would definitely embark on this project again, and I'd be keen to champion it if it was the same institution. So I'm not sort of in the messy middle going, oh my God, I wish I'd never started that, you know, kitchen renovation or whatever it, you know, the analogy is when you've actually lost all your tools and you don't know where you're going. So yes, definitely. Given the context of our institution, the mission, what our students told us they needed, what we wanted to do, and with that overarching desire of improving the student experience and also providing that capacity to boost research productivity, absolutely the right decision. Has it delivered the outcomes? Well, it's too early for us to know, but the anecdotal evidence is that for those students who are studying in the new model already, and we're only in our first year, and for the staff who are teaching into it, that they are seeing already some improved outcomes, and particularly around the ability for students to stay engaged in the course and the subject from week 1 through to that final assessment item. So we've seen some improved student success rates already. So similar to, we hope, what the VU profile has delivered for its students.
And look, my wrap-up point would be to pick up John's thing about this. It's not a start and end project, that it's a continual process. When I first went to Flinders Uni as a school leaver, the courses or the subjects ran full year, and they were taught in 3 trimesters. But you only did 4 subjects for the entire year, and 90% of the students were school leavers. And that world doesn't exist anymore. And the model we have, or the students we have now, may be very different again in 10 years' time. And so it is a continuous, if you're student driven, it almost is a continuous change model, because the students and the environment keep changing. So it's keeping up. Look, thank you very much. John, Romy and Karen, thank you for your time. Unbelievable to get your views. I apologise if anyone listening, we didn't get to your questions, but there is so much demand here. Maybe we'll do some follow-ups and get some questions. So thank you again for your time. Really appreciate it. And to our panelists, thank you. Couldn't do it without you. And so really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.